referred to as the Will Rogers of the second half of the 20th century, Mr. Mort Sahl.
My own audience. Listen, before I say anything else, let me explain the introduction. All the audiences aren't as friendly as they obviously are here, and I have to do something to gain the upper hand immediately. I'm still performing 29 years later. I just finished in New York at a club called Martin's, where, to put it in academic terms, the attendance was very high, but the audience had trouble processing the density of the material. That's a good Hewlett-Packard analysis. So anyway, I use that introduction now universally because President Reagan did say that recently in Time magazine. And for those of you who never saw Will Rogers when he appeared here, let me tell you the similarities which I'm proud of the President's comparison. Rogers used to come out, as much as I do, with a newspaper, and he would impersonate a yokel who was critical of the intellectuals who were running the federal government. And whereas I come out with a newspaper and impersonate an intellectual who was critical of the yokels who were running the federal government. Anyway, it's very hard to find out what's going on reading this paper. And my ambition is to find a city with 2 newspapers. That's all I want. I'm really, I'm not pushing any of the major social reforms anymore. Our side had to back up. And what is our side? Well, I know what my side is. I believe what Frank Capra said, and he gives Jimmy Stewart to say, technically, and Mr. Smith goes to Washington. He says, lost causes are the only ones worth caring about. My history. As soon as a man is elected, then he's fair game for me. And then I attack him and with a great deal of relish. That goes for President Reagan as a personal friend of mine for 12 years in Los Angeles. And once he was elected, I then went after him. And with pretty good fortune, a reasonably good fortune. It would help if there was a second party in this country. I mean, the fact that they have to attack Tip O'Neill as the head of the Democratic Party. Some of you may remember, the older people, that when Adlai Stevenson was alive, you knew who the head of the Democratic Party was. And you also knew you had a chance. He held no office, but he was America's favorite son. And maybe, absolutely. Now, I'm not very good at advocacy. You may not believe this, but it's true. But the first time in 29 years I've ever come out for a candidate, I'm much better at attacking. But I've always seen Senator McCarthy as more than a candidate. I saw him as an opportunity for America, as an opportunity for your parents in large measure who walk around and say that, what are we going to do? There's no one around. When a liberal says, what are we going to do? That's not to be construed as a question. So this afternoon I had occasion on one of the local channels to see candidate Mark Dayton telling what he was going to do. And kind of reminded me of Cardinal Vincenzi making a statement in court. Glassy-eyed there. I come from a generation, between your generation and your parents, chronologically, where wealthy men stayed out of the government. They wanted no part of it. It wasn't a bad America. They hated the government. It was sensational. At some point they decided to get into the government, and it has never been the same since. Not only has government not been the same, but business has not been the same. And business is not a dirty word to me. I don't even better one, industry. And, I'm for that. I'm for a lot of the old-fashioned virtues like capitalism, heterosexuality, and a lot of the things that we didn't have room for. The liberals, of course, spend all their time saying, well, look at what Reagan is doing to the country. If you don't like him, you've got to recognize that you helped put him there. You did it largely by driving the American people crazy. The liberals drove the American people crazy until they had had enough. and ended in this debacle, this election in 1980, in which Reagan and his troops arrived and said, do you want family structure? Do you want honesty? Do you want the old-fashioned values? Then vote Republican. Now, the liberals could have jumped up and said, wait a minute, you guys have got no monopoly on the old-fashioned virtues. You've co-opted them. But the liberals didn't. They said, wait a minute, you're not threatening to take away my lifestyle where I can get loaded and have an abortion and float downstream. If the liberals had stood up, if we'd all stood up and said to the Republicans, you have no monopoly on the old-fashioned virtues, the Republicans, I promise you, would have retreated to their original premise, the one they really believed in with all their heart and soul, greed. Anyway, in my travels for McCarthy this afternoon, I had to do a morning disc jockey show, a call-in show at KSTP. And, I'm an old hand. After 29 years, I've been at a lot of radio and television stations. I'm used to it now. You walk in, and when you walk in, there's a guard there to keep you from going in and assassinating the anchor man. And there's a guy there with an American flag on his shirt in case he's shot down in the newsroom helicopter over the Mississippi and he was picked up by friendlies. And not violent, it was origins. And then they have a plaque on the wall saying that they were the first station in Minneapolis to let Puerto Ricans use the library. Some kind of asexual crusade, some toothless crusade. And then they have a girl typing up front, an Eskimo or something to show their good intentions. And then you go in, and we're down into this tunnel, and there's Mr. Pomerantz, right, with the radio program. So, who asked me a lot of questions about does McCarthy really belong in Minnesota? You want to know that. And, Pomerantz, you kids didn't know, he came from Canada 3 years ago. I don't know if the INS knows this, but he's a lawyer. That, of course, impressed me. That balances out as being from Canada for me in my lifetime. Because, when President Nixon got into trouble during the Watergate unpleasantness, 47 members of staff went to prison, and 34 of them were lawyers. And where I live in California, the Bar Association was so embarrassed by this that they instituted an ethics exam for attorneys, which, although multiple choice, still so something to think about for all people. So anyway, off the air, as usual in these programs, the best things happen off the air, but I think you sense that without my telling you, because obviously if you heard the program, you know the best things were off the air. He said, Pomerantz says to me, I like this for knowledge. One of the things that's been held against Senator McCarthy by his critics has been that he can switch idioms very rapidly. He's not what you would call an orthodox politician. You know what I mean? He doesn't put everything in terms of power. He can talk to you about horses, talk to you about baseball, with real authority. And he can talk to you, in any number of areas that he's familiar with. An educated Renaissance man, I think. So, at any rate, he can talk religiously as well. And he's taught me a lot about Irish people, which I never understood before, and a lot about the Bible, which you can miss entirely if you watch television. So, at any rate, I was talking to Pomerantz during one of the many commercials, and he said to me, I've seen your act, and you stopped being a comedian a long time ago. He said, you're more of some kind of messiah to your audience. And he said, I want to warn you that it's dangerous to be a messiah, dangerous to a career. So I said, well, history teaches us it's fatal. So he looked at me kind of quizzically, genuinely perplexed, and he said, then the dawn came. And he said to me, oh, you mean Jim Jones? So I said, no, I was thinking of the Messiah. He said, which one? So, I'm an unlikely candidate to be teaching Bible school, but it's something to think about. I took a course at the University of Southern California in comparative religions, and I didn't get an awful lot out of the 4 years, I must admit, except that I know a Jewish holiday is coming, but there's always one coming, isn't it? And I think it commemorates the day that Admiral Rickover was passed over and forced to retire by President Reagan. Caspar Weinberger is also partly Jewish. It's Jewish, I found, is a thing you have to be all the time, or not at all, is best. But Caspar Weinberger is partially Jewish. For those of you who don't know Weinberger, he's the purchasing agent, sales agent for the federal government. And there was a time when skeptical liberals used to say America polices the world by holding one man's arms and taking his adversary and selling him a gun. We don't do that anymore. We're more even-handed under Weinberger's rule. Whenever there's a war, we cater it. But where were the liberals? The liberals were busy ridiculing Alexander Haig while Weinberger was going through their pockets. Haig is a 5-pack-a-day camel man who's had a 4-way bypass, drinks a quart of bourbon every day, and is 58 years old, is a Roman Catholic, and a general who is sympathetic to Israel. So they managed to get him out of there. Israel is not popular with this administration, but then Israel isn't popular with the liberals either anymore. I can give you the liberal wisdom week by week. This week at cocktail parties, people are saying, well, I'm in favor of Israel, but I'm certainly not in favor of bacon. That's the remark you heard. The week before, liberals were saying things like, do you think this country is manageable? They said things like that. And before that, they said the presidency was too big for one man. Before that, they said that the government was overloaded. The problem with liberals is that while they're valiant, they like to choose their causes. They like to choose things that won't fight back, like the environment and whales. They like to be kind of nature's noblemen, Gay pride. They're not too good on the firing line, and as a result, as I pointed out earlier, people like Ronald Reagan are inevitably they win. President Reagan. One of the questions Pomeranz asked me today, and Edward Asner, the president of the Screen Actors Guild, asked me 3 days ago. He said, why did McCarthy endorse Reagan? He said, tell me in a word. Fortunately, I had that word handy. I said, Carter. If Reagan had run unopposed, he would have been defeated. Now, knowing Reagan, I have a certain ambivalence, which I confess to you this evening. I find him to be a very likable guy, and yet being reared in a condition, as a result, in a liberal home, I have repressed feelings that he's dangerous as a conservative. So when I sleep and I can't censor my dreams, this is Freudian based, of course, I dream terrible things about Reagan that I would know in my conscious hours are not accurate. Would you like to know the dream? Maybe you can help me interpret it. In the dream, there's an 80-year-old Social Security recipient. At least he is at the beginning of the dream. I don't know what's going to happen toward the end of the dream. It depends if the fund is bankrupt or not. But anyway, he's in a moth-eaten bathrobe. Looks like an Indian blanket. And he's sitting in the sprayed bathrobe. And President Reagan is lifting him up by the lapels of the bathrobe and saying to the old man, when I was your age, I was working. So the dream's something to think about. So now, it's interesting. Did you ever think the day would come when a newspaper would say that Israel might be right that she's made bad public relations by fighting back? And when I was a boy, there was a racial stereotype among anti-Semites that the worst thing about Jewish people is that they were passive and they wouldn't fight. And now the anti-Semites, through diligent research, have found something worse than laying down, which is to stand up, which is unforgivable. By the way, last September, I was invited to the White House by the president for the state dinner from Malcolm Bacon. And that was before they sold the AWACS. And of course, before the invasion of Lebanon, which the president only knew about since last October. But, yeah, that's right, this is August. So, you see by my son. So, I think I was at the White House. If you've never been there, it's thrilling. And Senator McCarthy's been there many times. I haven't been there that many times. They usually hustle me in the back door and out the front door. But I did go as a guest. And a couple of interesting things happened when I was there. When you come in, you go through the south portico, and you're admitted by these officers that are over 6 feet tall in the Marine Corps, who make people of lesser stature from foreign countries feel inferior. And then when you walk in, you go through a receiving line, and you meet the President and the First Lady, and then they take you in, they play Hail to the Chief, the Marine strings. And then, when you first come in, they have a Marine playing the harp, a lady Marine, who's playing in the foyer of the White House, who plays the beautiful Dreamer, no mistake, perhaps Journey Too Far. You're a believer as I am. So then you go in, and then we had dinner, and then at the end of dinner, Reagan, they had 3 dinners there. They had filet of sole for all of us. Then they had a kosher meal for Bacon, which he turned down, and asked for a steak. And then the steak was excellent, and Bacon said to President Reagan, "Is this steak aged?" And President Reagan said, "We try not to discuss age here." It's one of his many jokes. So, and then we turned to macaroons, and then the Marine strings come in to descend. It's 40 or 50 violin players. It's very romantic, and then there are toasts. And Reagan got up and toasted Israel. He said she was our military surrogate in the Middle East and would stop the Soviets September 18th. And then Bacon got up and made Reagan cry by saying, by count, America has given more Jews a home than Israel has. And then Bacon told a joke, which is kind of in keeping with the way Reagan runs the White House now. And the joke made the rounds after that. It was pretty good that night. The joke, everything I'm telling you, by the way, is true. And everything I tell you is true, but some of it is actual. This is actual. Anyway, Bacon related how when he had been in Reagan's office, he saw 3 phones. One was a red one, which goes to the missile silos, and also goes to the Strategic Air Command and the Polaris loaded submarines. And a white phone, which goes to Secretary Schultz. That's how I planned to come out and greet you tonight. Originally, I planned to say, "Good evening, I'm Mort Sahl, a service of the Bechtel Corporation." But they didn't accept my offer. I was going to sell the rights to my life, get on with something productive. So, and there was a white phone to Schultz, and there was a blue phone. And Bacon says he asked President Reagan. Reagan said, "It's a direct line to God." And Bacon asked to use it. And he talked to God for 25 minutes, and he said, "How much is that?" And President Reagan demurred. He said, "There's no charge. You're a head of state, and you're my guest here." And this guy with owlish glasses walked in, named David Stockman. And he said, "I'm sorry. We're going to have to assess something here. It's $25.32, plus federal excise tax." And Bacon said it was worth it to talk to God. And then Bacon said he had repaired to his office in Jerusalem. And Ambassador Samuel Lewis, the ambassador to Israel, came in and saw a blue phone, and he said, "May I talk to God?" And Bacon said, "The least I can do here, since you're Representative Ronald Reagan, is to let you reciprocate." And Ambassador Lewis went on to talk to God for 20 minutes, and when he got through, he asked Bacon what the assessment was, and Bacon said, "A dime," and Lewis asked him why, and Bacon said, "Here it's a local call." That's the joke he told. And then when the dinner was over, they brought out these cigars, which I noticed came from Cuba. And we were in the East Room. Of the White House, and I was talking to Secretary Haig at that time. You recall him. Later became a public speaker. And I said to Secretary Haig, "This really means a lot to me. I don't want to be corny, but I'm known as a skeptic, and here I am in the White House, considering how critical I've been. It really is an American dream." And he said to me, I don't really relax at these things because I know the Russians are ahead of us. And I said, they are? I said, I find that hard to believe, that they're ahead of us in telemetry and missilery and rocketry. I mean, especially coming from a country that can't build a Chevy. And Secretary Haig said to me, neither can we. Interesting. So this has to do a lot with the subject of our inner source, whether we can, look to ourselves, whether we can truly look to ourselves. I wonder about it a lot. I came in last night from Los Angeles. It's not very different there. We're becoming a homogenized nation. And the overriding feeling among all of us is a hopelessness. No matter how daring or brave we like to think we are, we universally do not feel we control our destiny. The last time a lot of us felt that was when a couple of guys got haircuts and put on neckties and went to New Hampshire and threw Lyndon Johnson out of office over the war and really demonstrated that we could do something. In order to do that, what we were doing was we were doing more than stopping the war. We were having our souls saved. And the man that took that on was Eugene McCarthy. He and I first came across each other in around 1960 at the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles. I was on television then covering the convention. And since then, he and I have had a strong friendship in which, as he says, it's based on the fact that we bring out the worst in each other. But I was attracted to him the first time when Secretary Romney, who was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the cabinet of Richard Nixon, said that the Vietnamese War was reprehensible. It was a hell of a remark for a Republican cabinet member. Then he went to Vietnam, you recall. Nixon didn't approve of that trip. And he had his picture taken with General Westmoreland's arm around him, and he said, say, this isn't bad, once he was there. When he came back, John Chancellor asked him about his ambivalence about the Vietnamese War, and he said, I'm not ambivalent, I condemn the war around me. He said that I was brainwashed by the military, and that moved Senator McCarthy to observe that a light rinse would have done it. And after that, it was, it certainly was, clear sailing. But we suffered through a lot as we had. America has proved a great deal. This country has proved it can withstand a great deal. We're tougher than they generally give us credit for. When I said to you earlier this evening, just to return to my theme and tie it up here, when I said to you the liberals elected Reagan, they really drove America crazy. And I want you to remember what they did. At a time when people wanted jobs, they developed an inflation that will eventually give you, by 1990, $1,000 a week unemployment, but God forbid you should ask for a job. At a time when there is no industry, they were worried about whether Channel 17 had an Eskimo anchor woman. The liberals first went to work on justice. They went to work on justice. They didn't say there's no justice in general. They said, is there black justice and white justice? Is there white-collar justice and blue-collar justice? Then they went to work on the women. They were very good at making the women into a minority. The liberals, they said to them, you're wasting your time here. You're really not equal. Lo and behold, one night I was watching ABC television. I saw a 3-hour movie called The Woman's Room with Lee Remick. Now, in the interest of compressibility here, for the limited time we have, I'm going to use some psychiatric terms, but I know this is an educated audience, and you'll understand them. Lee Remick, within the play, was a liberal woman. She was in a dead marriage. Relationship really didn't give her anything. Her self-esteem had never been lowered, and she decided to go out and find out if there was anything out there for her. So she calls, her husband was an insensitive lout, was a workaholic. Do you recognize any of these terms? These terms all come from psychiatry. Psychiatry is a field in which the customer is always wrong. It's like political consultancy. So, no, they don't guarantee you no results at all. And they usually deliver that. So, so she she calls her husband comes home, you know, and is generally insensitive, comes home from this insurance office, throws up on the rug and goes to bed. You know, he barely says anything to her. And you know, she's home, you gotta realize, cleaning ovens and trying to carry on conversations with an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. Whereas her husband, look at the inequity, is out there in the world getting stimulating input at this insurance office where he works. He gets to drive on the freeway every morning and every night, and gets a coffee truck at 10 and 4. I mean, this guy's, you know, he's got some kind of life going on here. And she wants to share that. So she calls her 2 sons in, and she says, boys, mom's leaving. I've got to find out if there's anything out there. She speaks kind of poetically. The boys have an underdeveloped sense of poetry, and they think she's referring to the yard. There's nothing out there except my bike, you know. She's going to bring it out in case it rained and rust. So she says, no, not in practical terms. I have to leave. So she leaves and she gets a job, which is not defined because it's only a 3-hour program. But she rises rapidly. Now, in order to make it dramatic, she does have some problems along the way, one of which is sexual harassment. Her supervisor compliments her on her work, but being the villain of the piece, he really isn't as interested in her work as taking her to dinner. There are these kinds of men in society. I don't know how we weed them out. We can't promise you that this evening. But at any rate, he wants to take her to dinner, but he's shy, her supervisor. So he asks this mail boy, he said, will you ask her, if I asked her to dinner, if she would be receptive in any way? A very cautious approach. So the mail boy, of course, does the correct thing and reports the supervisor to the Department of Health and Human Services. And he's arrested in his bed that evening by federal marshals and charged with sexual harassment and conspiracy. Conspiracy being easier to prove in this administration. So, and he's serving a sentence where I hope he's learning a trade. A well-deserved prison sentence, federal prison. So she becomes an executive, you know, getting past all these problems, these hurdles. And in the end of it, she's teaching at a university. And, you know, that's as much as you can accomplish as an executive. When they ask you to teach at night, you know, that's high praise indeed. So she's teaching, and she says to her class at the end of the program, are you going to be new women when you graduate, or are you going to be old women? So the class is dumbfounded. So one girl gets up and says, much is in the paper chase. She says, excuse me, professor, but could you define what a new woman is? And for those of you tuned in at 10 minutes to 11, missed the program, Lee Remick conveniently covers all that. She says, a new woman doesn't want to be in love. She doesn't want any commitments. She doesn't want any children. She doesn't want any marriages. She wants economic independence to make her a full person. And if she finds she needs the warmth of a man's body biologically for an evening, she can ask him out, take him to dinner, deduct it on one of her corporate credit cards. And she said, I might call him the next day, in all likelihood I won't. Until I feel that need again. Probably call somebody else. Sort of cold, actually. So by now, a lot of you may have determined that the new women are a lot like the old men were. It's something for you all to think about. Anyway, the other point I wanted to make before we sum up here is that the liberals would also have you believe that in addition to racial injustice, that means black people can't get a job. In a country where almost nobody can get a job. They would have women are not treated equally. What is one of their other major issues? See, I'm really worried here, you know, because in a world without justice or romance, we might be better off dead. And I don't want to opt for that. I don't want to go for that option. The other issue that's come into this is that they've tried to put the face of evil. They've tried to make it Jerry Falwell's face. I think the cynicism within ourselves is a much greater enemy, and a much more steady enemy. The fact that we don't think we can get anything done. We think that our best days are behind us. It's not really true. I can prove that to you. I was with Reagan, by coincidence, in Houston when he addressed the Baptist conference, you know. And He was introduced by Reverend James Ropes. Those of you who have cable television have seen him. He's the one that said, Ronald Reagan's president will drive the perverts and liberals from our shores, conceivably in one craft. And when he introduced them, Reagan got up to these 3,000 Youth Baptist ministers, and he said to them, I never did believe in evolution. God, the audience loved it, you know. He said, where'd they get this guy? He's great. Bring him back next year. And man, by the end of this 45-minute address, he was getting requests from the floor, you know. Tell us about the world being flat. That was good. You look at me and you say to yourself, are you sure the world hasn't turned to ashes in your mouth? Isn't this a ride down nostalgia alley? Was it ever any different? You're damn right it was. This is America. It's Jefferson's America. We're Jefferson's children. And it was different. Because Adlai Stevenson once went to the Houston Baptist Conference 25 years before. And I was there. And he was introduced by another one of those noblemen who introduced him as follows. He said, Governor, we'll entertain your remarks, but I must tell you, we're already pledged to vote for President Eisenhower on the instructions of Reverend Norman Vincent Peale. And there are these 3,000 guys there with everything but a rope. And Stevenson looked at this guy and he looked at the crowd and he said, well, speaking as a Christian, he said, I find the Apostle Paul appealing and the Apostle Peale appalling. And he sat down. Adlai Stevenson was barely a Christian. You know, he was a Unitarian. We pray to whom it may concern. Someone once said that if you're bigoted and you wanted to drive a Unitarian out of the neighborhood, you would burn a question mark on his lawn. But at any rate, you know, there we were in 1960. Bobby Kennedy was on the floor. He had promised 9 men the vice presidency if they swing. That's right. If they swing their delegations to Jack. He even confided to me in person that if Jack didn't get it in a tidal wave on the first ballot, it would cave in and it would go to Adlai Stevenson. Mrs. Roosevelt believed it could go to Stevenson on the first ballot, and she was working for that. And it cost the Democrats a lot to reject Stevenson because there was a lot of their values that were implicit in him. As you can see by the Carter victory, you can't just win in name only. As you can see by the Carter victory and the subsequent Carter program engineered by Robert Strauss. So, because after all, what is a country? It's not a flag. It's not even the Constitution. It's the people. It's the fiber of the people. It's whether they give a damn about anything, and mostly about each other. So, Eugene McCarthy made the nominating speech for Stevenson. And the ringing phrase that night that he used at our call was, do not turn your back on this man. He warned everybody. He warned everybody that it was one of their last chances. It obviously wasn't their last chance. You always have a chance as long as you care about something. And the reason we came here tonight is to find out if anybody is listening and if anybody cares. The best thing about this job, is that I got a chance to meet a lot of good people. I got a chance to know Jack Kennedy, and I got a chance to know Adlai Stevenson. I had a chance to know William O. Douglas. And he was really something. I still have the current chance to know Eugene McCarthy. As I told you earlier, it's not in my line to endorse candidates, and sometimes I think it's very arrogant of performers. I'm not much for it. I just turned down the Brown campaign in California. You know about our governor, I'm sure. Besides the fact that he was the first American in space, has not solved the re-entry problem as yet. Before he went into politics, he studied to be a priest. Had to shave his head and take the vow of silence on the major issues. So, I'll tell you again, do not turn your back on your last opportunity you have a chance to shape your destiny. There are very few generations that have had that chance since Jefferson's, and there are almost no countries where that's possible without an AK-47. So do not turn your back on this man. There is Senator Eugene McCarthy.